Um, so I had an idea to do this birds of a feather session, and it will become more of a discussion than that it will be a presentation. And it is about all those national, big international initiatives around the world that are popping up. One of those examples is Argonaut, but well, we clearly have a lot of things going on in the world with FHIR. For example, the International Patient Summary or the International Patient Access. Well, in the Netherlands, we're doing METMEI, which is the Dutch PHR program. The Finnish also have their own program. And I'm actually wondering how interoperable are we if you look at this at an international level? So how hard would it be for example, a big tech company to go start operations abroad in another country? How hard will it be to actually implement country-specific profiles for a company like that? And if, for example, by some big companies, US Argonaut becomes like the new norm, is it also possible, for example, to have influence on how Argonauts should look like with all their profiles? So this will be you could see this as a discussion, and everyone can share his view and opinion on it, and perhaps we can organize the discussion in these 4 layers on interoperability. So how hard would it be for an organization or to expand to go to another country and adapt its information model in FHIR, for example? Does anyone has a view, or does someone wants to heat it up? Or can at least someone, yeah.
Something that's missing there is use cases. So I think that would be
Yeah.
useful first step to see what would be using that for.
Yeah.
Is it scoped around consumer access, or it's much broader than that?
I thought on the highest level, but maybe we can look at from a patient perspective, because of consumer perspective.
We have US core, and in Australia we took Argonaut, and we produced Australian Argonaut. So it's we actually started with the same source code and said, what do we have to change in Australia to meet the law and our regulations so that it's as little difference as possible. We can run that through HL7 Australia, get it approved to the Australian standard. It's proving really difficult to make that actually happen in Australia for a bunch of regulatory and government policy and business reasons. So it's sitting there waiting to go through the process. But it's not. So in some parts, the obvious differences are we don't use the same coding systems. Sometimes we don't have any idea what coding systems we use. It's a mess. And other things, we have really hard rules about using other coding systems. And then when you get to patients, some regulatory stuff steps in and interferes with the process. And then you get to this point where every country could do what we did. And so, okay, you've got Argonaut, which is kind of US, and then each country will have its own clone of that. That kind of be a bit messy, right? And then you've got IPS, which is off on a different tangent. So IPS is really good work, but in order to conform to IPS, you've got to do surgery inside the systems. Yeah, right. And right, but you've got to meet the content rules. And to meet the content rules, it has tentacles that reach a long way. And so Ricky said to me, we don't have a path. That's Ricky over there. We don't have a path going forwards. What we really need is an international spec for how to get access to patient data that's agnostic around the actual data that you get beyond what you need to get the data reliably. So that's this spec here as a draft. So this specification, it has the. You'll note that it's published under my name because not official HL7 project at this point. We'd like it to be, but basically I said this is a standard spec for every country to say we're going to give patients access. It works like Argonaut. I made a few extra rules over Argonaut, which will be a big bun fight, but they're based on our safety experience in USA. I didn't otherwise make any changes, and I just took out everything else. So just there's and it's still a work in progress. I meant to do more this week, but the technical correction turned into a nightmare. So it basically says you can get the stuff that you can get from Argonaut. It's the same in pretty much every country. There's a set of documentation about using the API. Some of it's still missing and will be filled in from my experience and other experiences. And then the artifact index, and I'm just going to pick one particular one. I'm going to pick condition. It just says condition. It says that you must support clinical status. It doesn't say very much on that subject. So basically, the idea is that every country meets these rules. And you say this is, and then you merge those rules with your like national-based specifications. So could be UK with Care Connect, or Australia with the Australian base, or US with US Core, or France or Germany or South America or whatever. Or, we talked about a combined Scandinavian spec at this level. So this is what you get. But whatever you get, you know that you get this. And so there's a base level of everybody getting access. And then, yeah. Yes, it's international. And then I didn't put it on this page. So back to the artifact index. No. None of them are interesting. Well, yeah, there is.
That's the challenge. What do you profile on top of the base standards as universal? That's really the question. And how common can that be kept? I think that should be valid because there's some profiles in FHIR, like the vital signs profile, which is already a profile that is pretty universal, right? And there's the personal health devices, and you might add it consumer access to health.
This one's more interesting. Maybe I hadn't finished with condition. Observation says that you will have a status, you will have a category, you will have a code, you will have a subject, and an effective time. You must support effective time and value and data absent reason. And I actually put quite a bit of work into this, subsetting US Core, Australian Argonaut, UK Clinical, Care Connect, some other FHIR specs. And this is what, and IPS too, and this is what falls out. So then it's basically, and then somewhere else I say that you will support search by status and date, last updated, and code, and category, I think. All right, so go on. Because almost everybody is using category on observation. So this is a little step further for a few, but vital signs, labs.
Do you have any commonality on how?
No. That's the problem. But see, you say what you can say. Yeah, that's a problem. But it's a stake in the ground, right? Well, that's when the bun fight starts. So I did not do that. Yeah, but we could make an extensible one. We probably could for a few of the base ones. We'd probably get away with that. We should. And we'll try. This is work in progress. And also, so it basically says you can connect, you can get observations, you can search for them by condition, by category, and date last updated, and status. But what you'll get beyond that, well, then you have to go look in a country specific specification. And so then each country says, okay, we've got our core. This is a set of minimal expectations that everybody has to conform to for access to data. It doesn't say very much about the data, but it does mean that you can consistently get access to the data. You won't get consistent access to consistent data. That's a step. This is another step. But you get consistent access to data. And then if you were writing software that ran internationally, this is what you could rest on everywhere. MedMy, I also looked at MedMy for this. So you could, that's the basic idea. So then there's like IPS. I'll stop in a sec. IPS is a different thing. It's a content specification. So part of this says that you can ask for this stuff as a document. If you are connecting to an IPS conformance system and you ask for it as a document, you'll get an IPS document. If you are connecting to a system that does not conform to IPS, you won't get an IPS document, right? So this is giving access. You may not get a conformant IPS, but if the system is capable of doing IPS, then you will naturally get IPS. And if the system does IPS, you will naturally conform to these specifications, because I don't think they say anything IPS doesn't, unless it's category. I'm not sure. No, you have category. Okay, so we require it because you've got to be able to sort between vital signs and labs, and you've got to be able to do that, right? So this is work in progress. It's not a formal HL7 project, but I will be bringing it forward as one whenever I have time, whenever that is, or when someone else does. And I just wanted to the shape of where Ricky and I think this should go. Did you want to say anything, Ricky?
Why don't I just step up here? So I think this is great work that Graham's done, and I think that one of the things that we found in the U.S. We don't want the U.S. to force anything on anyone else. I don't think that's not the right path to go. But what we learned as part of Argonaut is that we had to reconcile multiple EHR vendors, all of whom have a slightly different way of doing things. And it was thought that process was going to be very, very difficult. And you could almost see each EHR vendor as its own country in some respects. Trying to align them could be like aligning different countries. And so the reality is, if we could do that, if we could get Epic and Cerner and Athena Health and Meditech and eClinicalWorks and Allscripts all to align around one standard, all of whom have clients around the world, if we could do that, could we extend that to the rest of the world? And so I think the first question, sort of even one level higher than what Josh was getting to before, is, do we even want this? Do we want a standard specification that everyone around the world can use? Hopefully everyone says yes. If you're here at this conference, that would make all of our lives easier. And so the question then is, where are the things on which we can all agree, and where are the things that are different? And if we can have a relatively clear line there, that's exactly what Graham is showing here. There's going to be one piece of this on which we all agree, and then there are pieces where each country will have their own opinion, and we want to support that. We think that's the natural part of how things are going to be. And the most obvious piece for that is going to be your terminologies, because everyone mentions RxNorm because the crazy US has their own system, but every other country pretty much has their own medication terminology as well. And that's fine. That's a second order problem that will be solved independent of this. But I think there's work to do there as well. But if we can at least get this far, I think it'll be a huge step forward internationally. It will require some compromise on everyone's part, I think, to make this work. And I understand that different countries are already moving forward with their own profiles, and it might clash a little bit with what you're trying to do. But if we see this as sort of the greater good in getting alignment, even in the first 5 or 6 or 7 countries, the rest of the world will see that. And within 5, 10 years, who knows how long it'll take, maybe less than that, if we're optimistic, everyone will have a standard set here. So I think this is the seed on which that will work. And I think the hope is to get you all excited that this is an approach that can scale, and to get your involvement in in both vetting this, making sure it makes sense, and then also contributing to your country-specific piece here, so that we can start to organize this and not only have the desire to do it, but the tools to make it a reality, so that we can all be successful. So that's all I have to say. But it'd be great to get your thoughts on this as well.
Yeah. So, Rin, you had a question?
Yeah, it's, and I was just wondering, we used to talk about these things from a perspective of patients traveling, and now we're talking about this from the perspective of international tech companies, like there's a few in this room, which is a different approach, but I was just wondering, with Apple and Philips here and maybe others, would it help you if there was a thing like IPA to deploy international? Would it make life easier for the big tech companies? Well, that was for you, not for me.
Do I even need to provide an answer for that? Is that a rhetorical question?
Well, maybe not a yes or no, but is it still meaningful if you compare to what you've done in the US with Argonaut? Would IPA be similar on an international scale in terms of meaningful apps?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think hopefully that's obvious. If you can have one standard, regardless of what it is, then everyone's going to benefit from that, and not just Apple, but Google, Philips, all of you, large companies, small companies. I don't think this is about one company, and I don't think this excludes the case where patients are traveling and can get access. I think it enables that use case as well. So I think this is much bigger than any one company, as it should be.
Allow me to also comment, since you mentioned Philips, David Simon with Philips. I think I would also support this, but I see this actually as a natural evolution of FHIR, right? Starting with standards and then going up into the tree of getting into common universal profiles. So the initiative is very much applauded. Would I have called the session Argonaut International, or maybe MapMy International, right? It's all, where do you start? I think it should be bring in all the elements from all the nations and try and do that. Obviously,
Yeah.
but you get the point, right?
So,
Might be contention amongst the officers.
so when I set out, I mean, the mission I set out with was to internationalize Argonaut, to write a spec that provided safe access without imposing any more obligations than I had to for safe access. And that's the inherent mission. Now, I'm sure, given the nature of who we are, that everyone wants to argue about the exact decisions that we will or we will make. It's fine, that's what it's for. But the principle is to internationalise Argonaut with the safety lessons internalised and as little other constraint as we can figure out, so that you can get access to data.
Now, to that point, yeah, we're looking, and also across the company and business groups, to adopt profiles. And we now need to internally, as a company, try and find a common denominator.
Yeah.
We work in business,
So-
and then have markets do the translations. Yes, we're eyeing US forward.
So-
Argonaut is inspiration. I would love to.
So, Josh, and then Jim, and then Rob.
So I think this is great and it's valuable, but I will also say I think it has very modest value when it comes to how clients can sort of work with these data. So it's great to know what endpoints you can call. It's great to know that if a code is present, it must be supported. That kind of thing is all useful, but we're still going to be talking about on the order of 100 different profiles that are built on top of and compatible with this. And to build a rich consumer experience, you still need to understand the details of how the data are coded in those 100 different profiles to do things like intelligent aggregation and overview, summary statistics, all that kind of stuff. So I think this is great, but I'm almost more interested in understanding what are the other parts that we need beyond this API surface area.
What do you think?
Well, I mean, I'd like to know I'd like to know if the smart app launch thing breaks down, for example, if there's places where that's like just an unsuitable model because we want to think about others.
I mean, this is Smart App Launch.
So far as data profiles.
What it does say, I jumped to that, but it is Smart App, it is Argonaut, it's a Smart App Launch. The capability statement says that. It is those things. But then I'll go to Jim, but Rob has your answer. And this is actually a hedge that IPS will be slow adoption.
So I think I agree. I think this sounds good, but to continue playing devil's advocate, is there a risk that this becomes a way that an international company can say, hey, we've done internationalization, where if they brought just this level of stuff to Australia, then they absolutely haven't done localization for Australia because they don't support the Australian thing. So is there a need to be able to say, there are spots that will be needed to be filled for a specific country?
So I thought I was clear about this. In a programmer sense, this is an abstract spec. Well, it's abstract. You can't implement this spec as a server, right? You, as a client, you can consume this spec and get data that you need to become more acquainted with, per Josh's point. But as a server, no, you can't. Countries say, this is what we're going to do, but this is a set of wrapping constraints around the country's patient access. That means that we all have as much consistency as we can get. Every one of you in the room who says we should say more here has to confront the reality of the specifications we already have and argue from a data-driven point that we can get to conformance, to consensus on something.
Yes, I agree. All I would say is that, so you can't, for example, bind code on any of these, but is there a way to say you should expect there to be a binding on code?
I just did that with text in the spec so far.
I think you alluded to it and just probably just answered my question a second ago, but I was going to ask you if you had a few more words to comment about the relationship between IPA and IPS. And I think that what I'm hearing, I believe, my take is that they're basically orthogonal and they're kind of moving towards a common point from a different direction.
Yeah, kind of. So IPS, I think IPS is great work. I think it's really important. But when I run around the world and talk about IPS, I know how much consensus it's got. It's got some meaningful consensus in some countries. That's the reality that I had to deal with, right? So I don't see that IPS has meaningful consensus in USA, right? It's a curio. I see that IPS has meaningful consensus in some countries in Europe. In Asia, Australia, South America, it's got some interest in South America. But you know, when you go and talk to actual system owners, administrators, policymakers, they're not going to pay for surgery on a system, and to the degree that you can do something on the edge of the system to reconcile to the SNOMED free set, there's not a big value proposition for investing in that. So I like IPS, but I don't see it as something that's going to spread wildly in a way this could, just because it's harder work. It's better work because it's harder work, but so that's the first reality I had, is that IPS has got those headwinds. As much as I like it, it's got those headwinds. Second reality is that IPS doesn't speak anything to access. If I thought that IPS didn't have the headwinds and it was all tailwinds, then I would have just come and said, okay, we're just going to run this straight into IPS and run it straight through the process and it'll be good. But it's not where IPS is. So they are orthogonal, and the tailwinds and headwinds are orthogonal as well. But we want them to be compatible, so that if you have a system that generates IPS consistent conformant content, it will generate, and it puts up a patient access, it will automatically be conformant to IPA. And then when an IPA system that is IPS conformant generates a document, it will be an IPS document. Yeah, so that's where they meet. Yeah.
On a practical level, how would we develop this further? Would it be with like working group meetings at HL7, or what would be your approach to actually get all those countries involved and create that international spec? Do we have any thoughts on that?
Well, here I am. Here we are. So I will propose this formally to HL7 as a project, with support from however many people here and elsewhere would like to support it. There'll be some support at least, but hopefully there'll be more, to propose that HL7 take this up as a specification. IHE claim that they're already working on this, and so we have some reconciliation to do there. I think that this specification belongs at HL7, not IHE, because it's actually binding to HL7 affiliates, and I don't see how structurally we could have a IHE specification was binding to HL7 affiliates. So we've got some work to do with IHE on that, because I don't want to turf fight with IHE, but I just don't think this particular thing belongs there. IHE might choose to riff off this as well, but then really it's a matter of going to your national affiliates, national governments, and saying, would we countenance a world where we regard it as necessary for our national specifications to conform to international specifications in this way for patient access? We think the answer should be absolutely yes. So I will continue. I will move it through HL7 as a formal HL7 project and ask the affiliates to take up the question formally. But I think it's for all of us to advocate to our governments that either you think you should get on board with this, or if you think they shouldn't get on board, why that would be a bad idea, and maybe you can come and tell us why you think that would be a bad idea.
Okay, maybe I think here's a question. We still have 5 minutes left, so.
Yeah, first, Siemens Health in here, so very good idea from also our point of view. Just a question, does HL7 International feel itself in the position already for doing this kind of international implementation guides? Or is this still, it's, as I see it in the past, this hasn't really been so much in the scope of HL7 International to do the international implementation guides, right?
Well, I mean, HL7 does international standards. That's what we do. And implementation guides. If you look at this current FHIR specification or the implementation guide stack, I think we have 12 international implementation guides. HL7 hasn't had an implementation guide in this particular space before because there hasn't been one. But I think it's scope-wise very much in HL7's remit to do this document.
It's not really a question. Sorry, more of a comment. There's a piece of work that's started off in ARB looking at the way in which specifications get put together from an international versus local perspective, and trying to pick out those things which make something local rather than international, and be able to give effectively a checklist so that things can be done on a national basis, typically US, with a whole string of things actually marked up to be candidate universal, with some sense of what you would have to do to make that universal. And I think something like that was also a guidance for implementers, so you got a sense of what it was that you needed to be wary if you had an idea that you were going to make something international in the future. Would just give you a better sort of architectural structure. Yeah.
So I'm sensing a sort of shift in philosophy, and maybe I'm wrong here, but my understanding was that sort of the FHIR philosophy from the go was basically here's a set of tools. Now you guys have the need to exchange information. Please use these tools to describe what it is that you want, and use these tools to actually access the data. And I mean, sort of we have the whole OpenEHR versus FHIR, different kind of philosophies of how to solve the interoperability problem. What I'm sensing here is that the FHIR camp is now moving more towards a sort of standardization content sort of approach that would, if you follow it through, lead to where OpenEHR is.
Yes and no. I mean, my philosophy as product director is that we should standardize whatever we can. What we do and don't try and standardize is purely judged on community consensus. If by some miracle everybody in the world agreed that we should standardize laboratory code reporting, bam, we'd do it. Doesn't seem very likely. That's how we do that pragmatically. But there is a philosophical position here which first became visible in the specification in the vital signs profiles, which is that HL7 is pushing actively that when it comes to patient access, we live in an international market. When I first started talking about this, people were like, because we always had these infinitely high walls between around the borders of the countries. And we felt free to do whatever the hell we wanted in our own countries. So when I first started talking with HL7 and to the regulators around the world about the fact that patient access meant international devices and companies, and you couldn't balkanize by borders, it was mind-blowing for people. And so we have actively pushed this with the vital signs profiles on the basis that vital signs that will happen. And here, this is another exemplar of that. We have no intent or belief that we could take this approach into the national healthcare systems. It's not going to happen. So the philosophy that you talked about will remain the philosophy for the national healthcare systems. But when it comes to patient access, we are pushing that. And this is one manifestation.
Just one comment there as well. I think there are probably very few things that we could do as a FHIR community that would increase use of FHIR internationally more than this thing. I think if this were to be successful and everyone around the world had a clear message of how they could adopt FHIR, even just for patient use, that will result in huge uptake of FHIR nationally, which would obviously help for enterprise use, every use of FHIR. So I think you could see this as a foothold to increase use of FHIR in countries that haven't even considered it yet. And so I think that's one of the keys to gaining consensus on this point. It's a much bigger end result, I think, than we have currently.
And I want to add to that, where I get drawn into these discussions around the world, and right now I have no lever to go to a country and say, you should use Smart App Launch. You should use the Argonaut spec as a base. You should do this. But we don't need OAuth. We don't need this. We're going to do our security totally differently. We're going to do our engagement totally different. This is not productive. I need this specification as a lever for those discussions, and I'm not the only one who needs it at that level when you engage with national governments around the world who are starting to think about making data available to the patients and going, but we'll do it our own way. That is a discussion happening around the world today. That's what this is about.
We're over time, so I think this was the final contribution. So thank you all for joining this meeting, and well, have a look at international patient.